I did not start out as a historical costumer. So a long time ago, back in my early 20s, I was solely a cosplayer. I made some pretty awesome things and I went to a lot of conventions and, you know, it was really fun. But then there was one dress that actually completely changed it all. It was this one. The black and white dress that Katrina wears at the end of Sleepy Hollow for approximately 6 seconds. So for those of you who've been following me for a while, you'll know that I have made this dress 3 times now. And 2 of them were attempts at the screen accurate one. And the first time was when I was a junior in college. I didn't wear it with a corset. I had no skirt supports. It was made out of the wrong material. It was made out of cotton duck. It was so thick and so heavy, and it really didn't drape correctly. But that was like the bump I needed. I had the historical costuming bug from there on. And I still didn't forget the black and white dress. It still haunted me, and I made it 2 more times. Neither which times I'm really going to talk about in this video, since I already spoke about them at length in the other video. But if you are interested, I will link that below. While I was working on this, my friend Socialist Revolution gave me a really delicious bit of gossip. Elspeth, Gideon. Okay, so where was I? While I was working on the strawberry dress, Socialist Revolution, an awesome Instagram handle by the way, gave me a delicious piece of gossip. The original dress was actually made out of magic marker. Look at this photo taken by JP Thompson, who actually saw the gown at an exhibit. You can actually kind of tell from the way that the light hits it that actually it is marker. And moreover, if you weren't convinced with that, the exhibit photo actually says it. And yes, the original version was completely sharpied by what I assume to be an army of interns getting super duper high from the fumes. So, you know, that's what it is. So I imagine that he actually had them do this so that in the final gown that Katrina wears, he would have that black sort of liney hand-drawn quality in the stripe for his movie. So knowing that, I went ahead and bought about 6 different brands of Sharpies, fabric markers, and silk taffeta samples. And I started testing all of them. So I got about 4 different silk taffetas. I'm only going to show 2 different ones here. One is this one. It's a very thin sort of silk taffeta. It's not quite as crispy. It's fairly thin. You can see how it's unraveling at the edges quite a bit there. And if you look closely, all the markers bleed quite a bit. And no matter which marker I used, and I had multiple samples of this one, more than I'm just showing here, it really just kind of bled a lot. It didn't really soak up the marker all that well. So then I went for this one. Now you can see this one, it's not just the size, it's just like crispier. Like you can just tell that it's crispy. I'm gonna hold that up to the mic. And this one is the Sottavos from Elegant Fabrics, and it's actually a handler of Scalamandre, which is an Italian brand. And they're like my favorite fabric brand ever. So I loved it. It was super expensive, but I saved up for it, and then I got 10 yards of it. This is what 10 yards of silk taffeta looks like. And you'll notice that it's actually not pure white. It's more of a cream/ivory. I thought this was just such a deliciously wonderful cream. So I got 10 yards of this, and this is what I'll be using to make this dress with a lot of Sharpies. So once I had the fabric, I had to choose the marker. I played around with about 6 different brands. Let's see, I have Crafts for All, Arteza, Copic, Tulip, and Sharpie, and wider Sharpie. Now, I played around with all of them, and some of them bled more, some of them bled less. From that, I kind of came to the realization that Sharpie is it. Don't worry, I will be wearing my respirator and I'll be having all the windows open, even in the dead of winter. Don't worry, I will do this safely. So let's talk about stripe width. I don't know if you could tell from the photos, but just looking at it, I could tell that the white stripes were a hair thicker than the black stripes. So the question is now, how much wider is the white than the black? And I wanted to do that and figure out the proportions. So I went to Adobe Photoshop and used math and science. And don't worry guys, at the risk of perpetuating more Asian stereotypes, I am very, very good at math. First, I used J.P. Thompson's image from the museum, from the exhibit that she had. I used the Adobe ruler tools to sort of measure each width. And granted, I don't really care about the actual width because the camera is gonna give me a false number. I really just care about the proportion of the white to the black. So I took the average of the white stripes and divided that by the average of the black stripes. And that gave me a number of 1.1121, which means that the white stripes are about 11% wider than the black stripes. So then I started playing around with some stripes myself. So just for fun and a way to think of where to get started, I started drawing stripes on marker. I came out with this sheet, which I drew in Sharpie, where I made the white stripes about 7/8 of an inch, and I made the black stripes 3/4 of an inch. And then if you actually divide that, divide the 7/8 by the 3/4, you come up with the number 1.16 to 1. So it's about 5% off, but if you look at it, it actually is fairly convincing. If you notice, it even has the green stripes, which I did with Copic. And I think it's gonna be where I go for my mock-up. So to make my mock-up, I first had to draft a pattern. To draft a pattern, I start with a dress form that has the same measurements as me. The one I used was made for me by Beatrice Forms, a small company in Colorado which specializes in custom dress forms. It's really easy. After purchasing a kit, they send you a special top and bottom to put on for scanning, and then you have someone take a video of you using the camera on your cell phone. You'll notice I did mine with my corset on so that my dress form would be corset ready. The whole scanning process took about 4 minutes to do twice and resulted in a really cool looking scan. This digital image was then smoothed out, cut out in foam, covered with fabric, and mailed to me. There's so many little details I love about it, from my name engraved in the bottom to the acrylic topper and the really heavy cast metal base. The armholes are literally the same size and shape as my armholes, so it makes drafting bodice arms a dream come true. I can't tell you how happy I was to get it and how easy it was to set up in my sewing room. Once I had the dress form, I used pins and the draping method to make myself a pattern. I did this by pinning very thin black masking tape onto the dress form along the lines that I want the seam and edges of the dress to go. While the sticker of the tape does stick well to the dress form, I find that it helps to put a few pins in place because I do want this to stay on the dress form for about a week or two while I work on the dress. Then I got a piece of muslin and put it on the dress form, smoothing it over each pattern piece that I would want. I then used a pencil to trace it out. Once all the pieces were traced, I then added seam allowances and cleaned up the lines. You'll notice I did not put a seam allowance along the neck edges or the bottom edge. This way, when I put it on, I can check out the shape and not have to imagine how it would look without the seam allowance. The seam allowance can always be added on later, and I did. The pattern was then turned into a muslin, and I fitted this on the dress form again because I knew I had messed up the back while I was tracing it. I fixed it on the dress form and then sewed that new back seam in and then tried it on. The muslin fit perfectly. I then used a muslin to make a lining out of cotton twill, which is a little stiffer than muslin. Once I had that, I got a piece of cotton muslin and made a mock-up stomacher. Using Sharpie, I drew on stripes using the preliminary measurements that I had come up with, 7/8 inch for the white stripes and 3/4 inch for the black stripes. Instead of giving me 2 black stripes on each side of the white stripe, the initial measurement of the stripes actually gave me 3 full black stripes, which told me that the stripes were actually too narrow for my body shape. So I tried this again, this time making the stripes wider. I made the white stripes 1 inch and the black stripes 7/8 of an inch. This was perfect, giving me 4 wide black stripes in the front. Moreover, these measurements give me a white to black stripe ratio of 1.14 to 1, which is close to the 1.11 to 1 ratio I got in Adobe. Now that I finally had an appropriate stripe width, I actually start drawing the stripes out. I decided to start with the back panels of the gowns. The original movie gown looks to be made en furrow, where you have long widths of fabric, the height of the entire gown from the neck to the floor, pleated in the back to give you that look of the top and bottom being still connected in one piece, yet still having wonderful pleats. So to do this, I took the measurement from the nape of my neck to the floor, which came out to 54 inches. I added another 4 inches so I could account for the hem as well as the bum pad, and then cut 2 pieces of fabric 58 inches tall by the fabric width, which from selvage to selvage, which was 55 inches wide. About 1 stripe in, I started to realize that the Sharpie fumes were actually really toxic. I did not like it. I guess I could have just worn my respirator, but honestly, I didn't want to wear my respirator while I was doing a project at home. So I knew I said I was going to, but the moment I put the respirator on, I was like, no, I don't want to do this like this. So I switched markers. I put down the Sharpie and I picked up the marker which had the least amount of bleeding, which was Arteza. So Arteza fabric marker is what I went with. I had about 6 markers to start, but after about 1 stripe, I realized I really loved the look better. So at that point, I went online and ordered 10 more boxes for a total of 60. If you are curious, I actually used 48 out of the 60 for the whole project. I have to say I really like how the Arteza came out better. Sharpie gives you a slightly grayer line than the Arteza, if you remember from my fabric sample. So the Arteza gave me a really dense black, which I liked. And even so, there was still variation in the black, which is really important to have. And the Arteza marker is nice in that it has 2 ends, one fine end and one chiseled cut end. I used the fine end to draw the stripes on using a clear acrylic roller and the chiseled end to color it in. Honestly, it sounds crazy, but I really enjoyed this part. I found it really cathartic in the middle of everything I was going through in early November with the stress of the election, the pandemic, our hospital's increasing COVID numbers, to just sit and marker away. Each stripe meet took me about 15 minutes and I genuinely enjoyed the hours it took to do it. After drawing on about 2 stripes, I realized that having a cutting mat underneath the fabric really decreases the shifting of the silk. So I got a really large cutting mat that was 60 inches wide so that the entirety of the fabric could stay still on the mat rather than having to move my fabric back and forth on the smaller 36-inch one. For anyone wanting to attempt this costume for yourself, I highly recommend this, and I have linked all my sources below if any of you are interested in using the same pieces. The original dress had every other black stripe being outlined in green marker. I'm not sure why this is done, but I'm pretty sure it was probably to prevent strobing from the camera. But I decided to go ahead and try it. After I let the marker dry for 2 days, I ironed it like Arteza tells you to sort of firm up the color. And then I used some Copics to draw on the green stripes. So I did initially do this. Eventually I ran out of Copic markers. I ordered some more of the same color, but after about 3 days of waiting, it still hadn't shipped yet. At the end of the day, I was like, okay, screw it. I'm not putting this on. And I didn't love the look of the stripes anyway. I didn't feel like they added anything to the dress in particular. I'm pretty sure it was really just a camera trick. So I ran out of marker. Sorry guys. If you want to put green stripes on yours, please do so, and please let me know how it looks in real life. While I was markering, I was also working on something else. The lace that borders Katrina's gown is this lovely black lace on white netting looking like leaves and flowers. Costumer's Guide, a website I've been using for years, have some beautiful close-ups of it. So I initially digitized it to look like this. After testing it, I cleaned up the design and made it look like this. However, I really didn't read Costumer's Guide well enough, because if I did, I would have known from the beginning that this same lace trim was used in the movie The Affair of the Necklace, and that movie has a full view of the lace as opposed to just the top bit like you get in this gown. So using the image from The Affair of the Necklace, I was able to digitize the lace better, and this is all digitized on the program Palette 11 by Babylock if you're interested in digitizing your own. I ended up stitching this out with silk thread onto silk netting. So after I embroidered myself approximately 2 yards, which is what I needed for my neck and sleeves, I had to clean off the excess stabilizer. To do this, I use a dissolvable interfacing. My dissolvable stabilizer is made by Babylock, and afterwards though, I just kind of rinse it in water and the whole thing just melts away, leaving just your embroidery and the silk net that you embroidered on. Afterwards, I actually soaked it in water for about an hour to cut the extra starch off so that the lace is really soft. If you want it stiffer, I would highly recommend not doing that. So anyways, there were a bunch of pieces to marker. There's 2 back panels, each of them 58 inches by 55 inches. Then I had to do the petticoat front, the petticoat back, 6 long ruffles for the trim in the front and the sleeves and the bodice panels, the petticoat ruffles in the front, the petticoat ruffles in the back, la 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 la. There's just so much to marker. Meanwhile, it was time to start the back. Now the back is really complicated. It's made out of 6 different folds, resulting in pleating in the skirt, as well as a back that has a complicated system of different pieces. Now it's hard to explain, so I recommend looking at this drawing that I drew as well as this clip. So that is exactly how I plan on folding it. And as you can see, it's 3 different folds that go on top of each other in order to make that piece, as well as then putting on the front portion. I started by stitching the 2 big panels together in the center seam. I did this with my Baby Lock Soprano sewing machine because I may be willing to hand draw markers, but I will never hand seam a large piece of fabric together by hand. Then I cut off about 11 inches from the top of the fabric, 4 stripes wide on each side, and then seam the white stripes together at the top together 14 inches down, because that's how long I wanted the back seam to be at the center. I ironed all of this open, and then I actually cut out the excess from several different stripes so that when I pleated it, it wouldn't be all bunched up in the back. Afterwards, I pinned down the center white stripe and the partial black stripes next to it in the very center of my lining. Now that's how 18th century dresses are made. You make a lining and then you pin and sew different fabric pieces onto it to make it. Now for this portion, I did sew by hand, and I actually got to watch Clayton talk about her patterns and all the different patterns that she got. Oh my god, her haul is ridiculous. I did some hand stitching here. I'd use a very tiny back stitch. Once the first center as well as the 2 that went on each side went on it, I then went back, ironed the next 2 pleats, and then pinned that down, one on either side. Also sewed that down by hand. Again, these parts I don't mind sewing down by hand at all. Then took some time to play around with the pleats. I looked at pictures of Christina Ricci in the original gown, as well as pictures by J.P. Thompson from the gown at the museum. And then I sewed those down by hand as well. This was actually really fast compared to everything. I would say that sewing down the back probably took me about 5-6 hours compared to, markering, which took about 6 hours just for one side. That was super fun. This is always my favorite part, seeing a dress come together. I then had the front panels, which I had already markered out and cut out. I ironed the seam allowances on all the edges that were going to be towards the back, and then I pinned it to the dress lining around where I wanted it to be. I had to move around the pleats that I had initially put down a little bit because I wanted them to fit in with the stripes of the bodice perfectly. And as you can see, that's exactly what I did. Once I did that, I then stitched it down using black silk thread for the black stripes and white silk thread for the white stripes. Now to make the sleeves, I had already traced the sleeve pattern onto striped fabric and colored only the areas that needed coloring. I cut it out, leaving about a 1/2 inch margin all around on top of the seam allowance. On the wrong side of each piece, I used friction pens, which disappear with heat, to mark out the pattern again, and then the stitch line, which was the pattern piece without the 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once I had that, I put the 2 halves together. Then I carefully pinned the 2 together by putting the pin through the stitch line that I had marked and making sure that the same stripe bit was on the other side of the pin. I did this at every junction of the black and white stripe. This is a time-consuming process, but nothing about this dress is fast, so I don't mind making sure it's done right. Then I used my sewing machine to stitch the stitch line using ivory silk thread, trimmed it, and ironed it inside out. And voila! Beautiful black chevrons, just like Katrina. I did this for both sleeves, and then it was time to put the sleeves on. Now, I chose to add the sleeves on using the 18th century method. I know the movie version uses a modern method of sleeves, but I chose the 18th century because it allows for great arm movement, and come on, let's face it, I'm a historical costumer at heart. To do this, you first figure out the center point of the bottom of the sleeve. You do this by folding the bottom edges together and seeing where the mirror point is along the edge. I put a pin to mark that point. Then, on my dress form, I marked the lowest point on the dress bodice as well. Then, I lined the sleeve to the dress body, right sides together, pinning the 2 lowest points together. I stitched 3 inches towards the front of this point and 3 inches from the back for a total of 6 inches along the bottom of the sleeve. I did this by machine, of course. And then, the annoying part. I put on my corset, I put on my whole dress, and pinned it closed in the front. Now you have to make sure that it is pinned in the front. Then I smoothed the sleeve over my shoulder and pinned it until the top of the sleeve head was nice and smooth over the front of the shoulder. May I highly recommend using a trained individual such as a husband who has done this about 50 times to do it. Then I put some pleats in the back. I then used the machine to sew this flat onto the dress bodice and then covered this whole hot mess with a shoulder strap pattern piece. I again used black thread for the black stripes and ivory thread for the ivory stripes. I then sewed down the front as well as the hem. Once that was done, I figured out which points needed to be polonazed. I cut 3 pieces of linen tape 36 inches long and sewed that to the waist. I basically just pinned it until I found a region I liked. I sewed a loop onto the point where I wanted to pin it in the back as well as the front. Cut the linen tape until it was about the right length. And I was done with the base of the gown. Now to do the stomacher, I got 2 pieces of linen as well as the silk front that I had already markered and made sure that I liked perfectly, because I think the stomacher is the part that people will stare at the most. So I actually did this about 3-4 times until I came up with the stomacher that I really liked. And then I got the 2 linen pieces and I started sewing casings. Now a good stomacher should have boning in it if you wanted to keep the shape effortlessly. So on the 2 pieces of linen, I sewed 5 casings for the boning, each of them 3/8 of an inch wide because that's how wide my boning is. After that, the 2 linen pieces were strategically just acted as one piece. So then I sewed the linen pieces together to the silk front and clipped the edges, turned them inside and out. And then I put the boning in, turned the edges in, and then sewed those edges by machine because no one's gonna see those parts. I did do the top portion by hand, of course, using white thread for the white and black thread for the black because that part will be visible. So after all that, the stomacher was really easy. Now it's time to do the petticoat. The petticoat was something else entirely. Now the petticoat was a lot more time consuming. The base shape of an 18th century petticoat is 2 rectangles, one the length of your front, the other the length of your back. The back is usually a little bit longer than the front since that has to go over a bum roll. The width of the petticoat should be about 50 to 60 inches wide or whatever your fabric width is, assuming it's at least 50. I used the instructions for the 1780s petticoat from the American Duchess book. If you're interested in making this on your own, I highly recommend that book as well. Once those 2 pieces for the petticoat were cut out, I needed to make the 2 pleats for the front as well as a large pleat for the back. Now let's work on the front first. The pleats on the bottom actually have a wider stripe than the top, and it's ruffled into the petticoat as you can see from this museum picture. So to do this, I chose to draw on the stripes after hemming, a decision I came to regret. To figure out how tall to make these ruffles, I went to Adobe Photoshop and looked at a picture of Christina Ricci wearing the dress. I figured out that the combined height of the 2 ruffles were about 1 to 3.5 of the whole height of the petticoat, or 2/7 of the whole petticoat. Now 2/7 of 40 inches is something like 11.4 inches. Furthermore, it looks like the bottom ruffle is slightly taller than the top ruffle, so I chose to make the bottom ruffle 7 inches and the top ruffle 5.5 inches, giving 1 inch of overlap for a combined ruffle height of 11.5. Again, that's close enough to 11.4 to me. After all, this isn't rocket science. After I decided to do this, I cut the ruffles. I chose to make the ruffles at a ratio of 2 to 1, meaning that each ruffle stripe would be twice the width of the original, which meant that the black stripes would be 1.75 inches and the white stripes would be 2 inches. And then I sat and watched Time Team while I hemmed all of this by hand, and then I started drawing in the stripes. Then the regret hit. It turned out that the hemmed edges were annoying to color in since they were a little bit taller than the flat middle of the fabric. I did it, but it was annoying and took extra time. After this, I gathered up the top ruffle using thick cotton quilting thread from Gooderman's and then hand pinned them to each ruffle of the skirt where I wanted it to go. I made sure to line up the edge of each color changing portion to the corresponding stripe on top. I did the bottom ruffle first and machine sewed that on. Then I did the top ruffle, overlapping the 2 ruffles by about 1 inch. To make my life easier, I did use a friction marker to mark where I wanted the top of the top ruffle to go. Then I hand stitched this to the skirt. I then removed the gathering thread by just cutting it out. For the back of the skirt, I noticed something odd. Instead of just having 2 ruffles go all the way around, which is a little bit more typical for 1780s skirts, they chose to put in 1 super tall ruffle in the back. This is not known to any dress in history, but again, this is a movie costume that isn't historically accurate, so I chose to do it the same way. If you look at the movie costume, especially while Katrina is walking away from the movie, you'll notice that the top region here is a different white and not striped. I personally think they ran out of Sharpies and or interns by this point and decided to leave it unstriped. My version would be striped, of course, there, but I didn't bother striping all the way to the top. I figured the halfway mark should be enough, and it was for my purposes. For the bottom ruffle, I made a double length of ruffle, 19 inches tall, twice the width of the petticoat. Having learned from the front pleats, I did the marker stripes first and then hemmed. The top of the ruffle I just serged, and then I gathered this with a piece of strong thread again and attached it with machine sewing to the petticoat top. Then once all the ruffles were on, I sewed the back of the petticoat to the front of the petticoat and using the instructions from the American Duchess book, finished it off. Now that it was done, it was time to trim the dress. To trim the dress, I made a special stripe that was 2 inches wide with white and black stripes instead of equal width, each about 1 inch. I then cut them out and I cut out 6 rows of that. If you look carefully at the movie costume, you'll notice that the white edge is actually starting to fray a little. This told me that they didn't actually use fray check on it. I also did the same. I came to regret this later, but hey, it's movie accurate. As for the black stripes, the fabric marker acted like a glue to keep it from fraying and acted as its own fray check, which was pretty nice. I also cut up some organza and frayed the edges to give the same look as the original. If you'll notice, there is a little bit of organza that has been frayed behind the black stripes. I then combined the two and used a running stitch to gather up the fabric by hand. If you knot it every 2 inches or so, it's time consuming, yes, but the gathers just look so much nicer at the end, and in some ways it'll save you time. Then I sewed all of this by hand onto the front. If you look at the neckline of the dress, you'll notice that the white trim has been folded over to make a casing. It looks like they use a casing to draw the front up. Mine really didn't have any need for gatherers, so I made a casing-like look, but I didn't actually put anything in the casing. So I folded over that edge and ironed it, and I didn't put a casing in. Now for the sleeves, there was something slightly different. Each sleeve had the organza and then a triple ruffle of white, black, white, then a second triple ruffle of black, white, black, and then a double ruffle of white and then black, and then a final layer of organza. Now it's time to add the lace. Once everything was sewn in terms of trim, I got my black lace that I had already carefully snipped out and then sort of just sewed it onto the neckline as well as the sleeves. The dress was done. Anyways, so I can honestly say this project is a dream come true for me. This is exactly how I wanted it to look in my head. If you have any questions, if you want to make your own, if you're curious about anything, feel free to put a comment below. If you want me to see me make more movie costumes instead of historical ones, or if there are historical movie costumes you want me to make, link those too. I'm always excited to get new ideas and more inspiration for new and future projects. Finally, I just want to say thank you to everyone for watching this. I had a really great time making this. Wearing it is so much fun. I am so happy. I cannot wait to wear it everywhere else. Anyways, if you enjoyed this, please subscribe. I make a video every month. See you next time.